18 months before the Haymarket incident, August Spy's younger brother, William was killed by the Chicago police. At his execution, August Spies looked down at his doom on the hangman's wooden platform and he said, "The day will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you strangle today." On December 30th, 1887, Johann II dies in Sanfordtown. Also, on December 30th, 1887, William Justice Goebel was just elected to the Kentucky Senate and he took the oath of office. William Justice Goebel declined to place his hand on the Bible, and instead he put the fingers of his right hand in his vest pocket. William Justice Goebel would be re-elected to Kentucky State Senate 3 consecutive times. On June 15, 1888, Wilhelm II becomes the German Emperor. In 1889, there are 8 socialist daily newspapers printed in German in New York. William Justice Goebel was a principled untouchable. In 1891, William Justice Goebel was a principal author of the 1891 Kentucky Constitution. He was a founding father. William Justice Goebel was instrumental in getting the Railroad Commission established in Kentucky. Goebel made sure the current Kentucky Constitution, the one that guarantees the right to violent revolution per Section 4, regulated the corporations. William Justice Goebel fought against James Buchanan Duke's American Tobacco Company, who is the enemy of the Black Tobacco Wars in western Kentucky because it was a monopoly and was squeezing prices out of the farmers. Goebel advocated giving black people the right to vote, and he fought on behalf of the coal miners in eastern Kentucky. He sided with them in every incident that they were in, regardless of their guilt. Goebel also outlawed child labor. Goebel was incorruptible, he's untouchable, and the professional Republican corruptionists hated him because of that very fact. As a public official, William Justice Goebel was a radical progressive. He fought the expensive toll roads, being in favor of free roads for poor farmers. Goebel fought the L&N Railroad monopoly, which is known today as CSX. Basil W. Duke, John Hunt Morgan's raiding buddy, controlled the railroad, the L&N Railroad lobby, which is ironic considering Basil W. Duke was riding with John Hunt Morgan, and John Hunt Morgan and his raiders were going around destroying L&N railroads, and they were making Morgan neckties with the train tracks. So before, when Basil W. Duke was destroying the L&N railroads, later on Basil W. Duke became a sellout to the railroad corporate influence, and he became the most active L&N railroad lobbyist in Frankfort. In the 1891 Constitution of Kentucky, Goebel passed a minimum age for children to be allowed to work, thus outlawing child slavery. And he also required that worker payment is in currency instead of company store checks. The 1891 Constitution, which is Kentucky's current constitution, started out by being anti-corporate and pro-farmer. In 1892, after 13 years of construction, the Neuschwanstein Castle is finished. The Neuschwanstein Castle is a model for Disney's Cinderella Castle. From 1893 to 1912, Sanfordtown had a post office which was run by John Weisenberger, who was the first postmaster. John Weisenberger is the one that had his Union flag ripped down from his house and destroyed by the John Hunt Morgan raiders, including Basil Duke. In 1893, the German-born governor of Illinois, John Peter Altgeld, pardoned the men involved in the Haymarket police riots who are still in prison. Several urban centers in 1893, they cut the wages, the L&N cut the wages, and so 1,400 railroad workers united in protest in solidarity with Eugene Debs Pullman workers. Eugene Debs Pullman strikes were blamed on German and Bohemian agitators. William Justice Goebel defended the unemployed laborers and the strikers without charging them a single dime. In 1895, William Justice Goebel's fight against the toll roads on Kentucky's turnpikes cost John Lawrence Sanford a great deal of money. Kentucky had lots of toll roads on major turnpikes and transportation arteries. Farmers, working class, and poor people hated them. John Lawrence Sanford was for toll roads. William Justice Goebel and John Sanford fought for 3 years over a court case involving toll roads. John Lawrence Sanford was an ex-Confederate, ex-public official, and now he was running a bank. Goebel and Helm came across Sanford one day, and Helm spoke to Sanford, who responded. And after a reminder from Helm, Sanford spoke to Hendricks, and he held out his left hand with his right still in his pocket, and he shook hands with Hendricks. And then John Lawrence Sanford turned around to Goebel, and Goebel was standing 3 or 4 feet away from him with his overcoat over his left arm and his right hand in his front pants pocket. And Sanford said, "I understand that you assume the responsibility of that newspaper article." Goebel answered promptly, "I do," whereupon Sanford withdrew his right hand from his pocket holding a revolver, and he thrust it forward quickly in towards Goebel's abdomen and fired, the ball cutting through Goebel's coat and the lower edge of his vest. Goebel made 1 step backwards, dropped his overcoat, and withdrawing his right hand from his pocket. He also had a revolver, and he shot John Lawrence Sanford in the forehead with his .38 Smith & Wesson. Goebel said, "My jury was composed of 6 good citizens, 1 an ex-sheriff, 1 the principal of a district public school, and 1 who has since served a term as president of the board of aldermen and is now county assessor, and the other 3 were honest, reliable working men." And that jury brought in a verdict that the shot was fired by Goebel in self-defense. The 1895 general election for governor of Kentucky, William O'Connell Bradley, carried the vote of many Kentucky Gold Democrats. William O'Connell Bradley also drew a number of votes from those who sympathized with the views of the American Protective Association, which was an anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic organization. Some estimates placed the organization's membership at 14,000 in Louisville alone. It also had strength in the urban centers of Paducah, Lexington, Ashland, Covington, and Frankfort. William O'Connell Bradley was fanning the flames of hatred against the foreign Germans in order to get the English Protestant and the nativist votes in 1895. During William O'Connell Bradley's 4-year term, there were 25 lynchings were committed in the state of Kentucky, which was better than the last 4 years, which had saw 56 black people get lynched. William Justice Goebel toured Kentucky with William Jennings Bryan, who had warned us that mankind shouldn't be crucified upon the cross of gold, and who also advocated bimetallism, to make silver into a currency in order to inflate the currency so that the farmers in debt would be able to get some relief. In 1897, a severe flood damaged the church and many homes in Sanfordtown, Kentucky. On April 13th, 1898, Big Jim Howard, a Clay County Republican, murdered George Baker in the Howard-White-Baker feud in Barbersville, Kentucky, in Knox County. In Kentucky's governor's race in 1899, you had Democrat William Justice Goebel running against Republican William Sylvester Taylor. And also John Young Brown was a Confederate Dixiecrat who was a defender of the gold standard and was the 31st governor of Kentucky. He was a Democrat who ran against Goebel, the German, in the general election, but he had lost handily. He was kind of like a third-party candidate. John Young Brown was denied a House of Representatives seat because of his disloyalty to Kentucky and America. Later on, the stabbing in the back continued when John Young Brown became a lawyer and defended Caleb Powers. William Justice Goebel had pushed 3 major pieces of legislation that did not get passed: the Goebel election law, the McCord Railroad Bill, and the Chin textbook law. Goebel then used those failed pieces of legislation as campaign issues for his stump speeches for the 1899 gubernatorial election. The McCord Bill, according to the Lyon Louisville Courier Journal, which is a pro-Confederate, anti-German newspaper, was controversial, saying that no other measure before the General Assembly for many years has been so bitterly and persistently opposed by corporate influences. The Chin textbook law outlawed textbook monopolies, since no corporation should have a monopoly over knowledge, and the Goebel election law was brought about to stop the vote buying and the election rigging, which had given William O'Connell Bradley his governor's seat in 1896. The Louisville Courier Journal was founded by George Prentice, a Confederate racist asshole and a German hater. And then the flamboyant Henry Watterson took it over. And Henry Watterson was also a Confederate asshole and a German hater. And he fought with Nathan Bedford Forrest at Fort Pillow. So he actually rode with the founder of the Ku Klux Klan, Nathan Bedford Forrest, at Fort Pillow, the worst massacre in the Civil War. Some of the most disgusting, bloody massacre of black people at Fort Pillow, and that was Henry Watterson, which of the Louisville Courier-Journal. So Henry Watterson also wanted the governor's throne himself, and he published lots of rancid hatred towards William Justice Goebel. So the anti-black, anti-German racist Henry Watterson also put lots of pressure on the United States government so that the U.S. would enter into World War I in order to kill the Germans. William Justice Goebel started out making money as a watch and cabinet maker. Eventually, he became a trial lawyer, and he for the poor man fighting against the railroads and the state-chartered corporations. When the L&N Railroad, like Basil W. Duke, would buy other politicians with whiskey, bribes, prostitutes, Goebel was pushing for the L&N Railroad to pay their fair share of taxes. In 1900, New York City, Milwaukee, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Wisconsin, New Orleans, and Cincinnati, in the Midwest, Cleveland and Baltimore, all these areas had a German population of more than 40%. In 1900, Sanford Town, there were 6 African American households listed in Sanford Town, and both Mary and Kate Gripshover were listed as white. January 13th, 1900, Goebel's State Railroad Commission threatens to cut the lines for the King Coal corporations due to the discrimination in market value for Kentucky coal over Virginia. On November 30th, 1900, as William Goebel was making his way to the state capitol office building along with 2 other politicians, a gunshot was fired and Goebel fell to the ground. 5 days later, William Justice Goebel, the Kenton County Kaiser King, was dead. William Justice Goebel was the only governor in America to ever be murked. William Sylvester Taylor had ordered his minions to bring up lots of Republicans with guns to the Capitol building in Frankfort in order to create an atmosphere of intimidation. The CEO of the L&N Railroad used his rails to transport lots of these armed men to the Capitol building in Frankfort. At first, when William Sylvester Taylor was prematurely announced as governor, Taylor was pardoning any and all of the corporate men who were accused of enticing a riot. After Goebel fell, even though he promised that he wouldn't flee, William Sylvester Taylor fled Kentucky and he went to Indianapolis. And the governor of Indiana refused to extradite William Sylvester Taylor back to Kentucky for the trial. In the many trials that came after Goebel's assassination, Sergeant F. Wharton Golden of Barberville, a militia sergeant and a friend of Caleb Powers, testified that Henry Eckert Yautsey, a clerk for the state's auditor, was the man who John L. Powers had given a key to Caleb Powers' office. The gunshot came out of Caleb Powers, the Secretary of State for the Republican at that time's room. Caleb Powers was on an L&N Railroad organizing more Republican gun thugs to go to Frankfort when Goebel was shot, which gives him a perfect alibi. During Henry Eckert Yautsey's confession, he said that the Republican gun thugs were supposed to be fake witnesses during the contest court cases and legislative hearings. So the Republican gun thugs were going to get into the trial and be fake witnesses and give false testimony in order to cover their and their buddies' crimes up. W.H. Colton testified that Big Jim Howard had told him that Jack Chin ran away like a coward when the first gunshot went off. And when W.H. Colton asked Big Jim Howard what he meant by that, Big Jim Howard told W.H. Colton to not be stupid. Frank Cecil testified that Caleb Powers and William Sylvester Taylor had discussed killing Goebel with him. Henry Eckert Yautsey confessed to Arthur Goebel about being an accessory to the assassination right after the assassination had happened when he was sitting in jail. And then when he testified on how the murder of William Justice Goebel went down, Henry Eckert Yautsey said this: "I have been indicted, tried, and convicted of the murder of William Goebel. I was born in Campbell County and I am by profession a lawyer. At the time of the murder, I was living in Frankfort, Kentucky. I went to Cincinnati for smokeless cartridges with steel bullets. We wanted that kind as we understood that Goebel wore some armor of some sort. The bullets were to be used in a .38-35 Marlin rifle which I had borrowed.